Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to our semi-annual Port Industry Issues presentation. I'm Captain Jeff Monroe. I'm the Director of Education Programs here at the International Association of Maritime and Port Executives. And we are, as most people know, we are a not-for-profit industry association, and we have some great partners in the 6 schools that you see listed below who give graduate level credit for people taking our programs. We also, some of our programs qualify for the AAPA PPM program, as well as other continuing education credits across the board. And very pleased that the IAMPE has been very, very successful in the last 15 years in training persons in the industry, getting out, and we have some great partners, particularly with inland rivers, ports, and terminals, and 5 other, or I should say 9 other industry partners that work with us and whose members take our training. We have a lot of key issues out there right now, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, what's happening and what's going on, and kind of catch it caught up on what's going on in the current state of the port industry, so you have a sort of a better sense of this. All right. First of all, as you know, we've come out of the COVID period and we've seen a lot of increases in cargo moving through, but we do have stabilizing cargo volumes generally worldwide, where they're not only stable, but they're also increasing to a certain extent. We have the world shipping rates have been settling down and are starting to come down a little bit, despite the fact that we're having issues, continuing issues in the Red Sea. Obviously, our port infrastructure, particularly in North America, where we're spending a lot of money just restoring our property as addition to expanding that property. And that includes our road, rail, and waterways, and our terminal facilities. There's been a lot of investment because of the PDIP grant program and other federal government programs that have come out. We're seeing the impact of larger vessels, though we're only going to see a certain size here, which we'll talk about. We have had kind of an active, last year with natural disasters, and we've been facing some of that again this year as well. There are lots of changes with environmental protection and pollution. Some world choke points are still continuing, and some port congestion with terminals that you're seeing high volumes go through. Supply chain delays are still occurring. And of course, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act is in play, and that has had some significant impacts. And as always, we seem to be always having staffing issues overall and getting qualified people to be interested in our industry. All right, we are seeing that the number of imports have picked up, and this is kind of twofold. Number one, during COVID, there was a great deal of stockpiling of material and warehousing. And as a result of that, what's happened is that they've been burning down a lot of that stockpile and getting it out, which means that a lot of the material now has been coming in as imports. Of course, a great deal of it coming from Asia, and that has been underway. And that has ticked up the amount of cargo that's being handled. So it's been up 10% year over year, which has been pretty good. And that has restored basically, a lot of the services and, of course, a lot of the cargo moves through various locations. Now, we have some supply chain issues that continue, particularly in the maritime world, but overall, the world trade performance in July was well above trend, which was good. This is a barometer that's put out there by the World Trade Association. And basically what they do is they look at all, not just container trade, but all cargoes in general. And we've seen that it's a lot higher. It's mostly being driven by automobile handling and container handling. But we do recognize that the other cargoes that are moving through have been fairly steady. And bulk cargoes tend to be steady anyway. And of course, as most people know, we're the largest exporter of ultra low sulfur diesel in the world, right? So we have become a very significant export country. So that has been pushing us toward keeping that above trend level in play. World trade, our exports are up, our export orders are up, supply chain issues have eased a bit. The dry cargo index is up, freight rates are up, and global manufacturing is up. So those are all pointing to promising things. And despite the fact that, we're always worried in the United States about inflation and everything else, that we have seen cargo movement and people are still buying. They're trying to get rid of their debt, but there's still a lot of purchasing going on. And that's driven a good portion of the import side of it. So with port volumes, they were very strong in 2021. They softened in 2022, remained soft into 2023, and we saw an uptick in 2024, and that uptick has increased. All right. In July alone, the imports were up 14% over last year, and that was very positive from that standpoint. And we're starting to see an uptick again, particularly in September, because people are racing to get cargo moved as quickly as possible as a result of the potential impending strike on the U.S. East Coast and the Gulf. We had a lot of backups that were sitting of empties that were sitting in our ports. That has eased up quite a bit. Some of it through extra fees that were put in place, like the Port of New York, right? But the empties are going back because that's driven fundamentally by demand. So they're trying to turn the empties around as quick as possible. The China empty ratio was at about 60% of empties sitting in ports over there. Most of that is starting to burn down and back to the 40 to 50%. We saw some reduction of congestion, but interestingly enough, it is picking up. Some of the congestion is picking up again, particularly on the West Coast, because cargo has been shifted over there as a result of what's going on with the Houthis and also what's going on in the pending strike. The container rates went up in Q1 and Q2, and obviously we're waiting to see what the numbers look like in Q3, and I'll show you what those rates are as of last week. And we are seeing much stronger rates on high demand routes, particularly Pacific. Those route rates are about the highest in the industry now, followed by European imports. And then, of course, a lot of the retail commodities, as I mentioned, is easing, and the imports are beginning to increase overall. So the spot rates have been kind of up and down, up and down. They stabilized for a while. They got low, and then, of course, as soon as the Red Sea issues picked up, everything, picked up a little bit on the rates, and it hit a high, and now it's starting to drop down a little bit. Which I'll show you in a second. The Red Sea issues, obviously, potential labor issues. There was a lot of concern with what was going on with the potential rail strikes with the Canadians, and the government stepped in on that. We do see congestion in Asian ports. Singapore, for example, and several other Asian ports have gone to 24-hour operations just to get the ships turned out as quickly as possible, though most ports operate 24 hours anyway, but they're accepting gate moves as well. And of course, we've seen some weather issues, though they have not been as bad so far, knock on wood, as it was predicted, though we do have a number of storms now that are kicking up in the Caribbean, and the South Atlantic moving across from Africa. All right, so the World Container Index, as of the 5th of September, dropped 8% to about $4,700. That had reached a high in the high 5,000. And of course, this is the world average of container rates, some being higher and some being lower. But it was about $5,900, plus or minus. But it has dropped now down to about 4,700. So it's starting a little bit of a slide. And I think part of that issue revolves around one simple thing, is that the industry has adapted what's been going on in the Red Sea. So as a result of that, I think overall that has sort of settled itself out, and the rates are dropping down a little bit. Do I think they're going to be a dramatic decrease, I should say? And I don't think there will be. I think right now they're looking, the ocean carriers and stuff like that have got a lot of changes internally, so they're going to try to keep this as high as possible, and what can be reasonably expected and absorbed by the shippers. All right, dry bulk demand was good. It's not just about containers. So this is Q4, which is the most up to date we have available, and there'll be new numbers coming out for mid-year soon. But that was fairly steady in some commodities, and that remained pretty good. And as I mentioned, most of the time we see petroleum cargo, food cargoes, agricultural products, and also minerals and metals and stuff remain relatively steady during the year. So they're sort of a base cost. It's like your own personal stock portfolio, right? You put some into high-tech stocks, right? And some of your money is in fixed CDs or mutual funds or whatever, right? So you like to have a nice mix of different type of cargoes coming into your port. And the bulk rates always tend to be fairly consistent. The commodities may change a bit, but overall they stay relatively consistent. All right, worldwide shipping as of the end of last year, the number of ships were up. Bulk carriers were picking up, which means that There's no overcapacity anymore like there was, and the rates are up. General cargo, obviously, crude oil, a lot of oil moving. We're moving as much oil out as we're moving in because we're seeing a lot of our refineries are still set up for the heavy crude. So we're bringing in crude oil from Saudi Arabia and from the Middle East, right? Container cargo, that had dropped down considerably, but now some of the new ships are coming out. So the TEU capacity is increasing, overall worldwide. Chemical tankers, ro-ro ships and cruise ships, a lot of new cruise ships coming out, a lot of old ships that aren't really that old, less than 20 years old, are being scrapped because those cruise ships don't have the wow factor anymore, right? And of course, we do see LNG going out as well, which is another byproduct. So we're also a big exporter of gas as well in this country. All right, so if we look at the largest container ships right now, the largest one in service is the Irenia, followed by a double OCL ship. One has got the Innovation out. MSC also with Tessa. MSC has kind of been an interesting story this year. We'll touch on base on that as well. The Ever-a-Lot and the Ever-Ace, Hyundai Merchant Marine Algeciras, the Oslo, the Gulsan from MSC, and then of course the Berlin Express. So as you begin to see more and more of these larger vessels that are out there, which means that the pendulum services that were designed to occur between Asia and Europe are taking place. All right. And we're starting to see more and more of that, despite the fact that the Red Sea is clogged up because of the issues being played with by the Houthis. And some of these larger ships are going around the Cape of Good Hope. And they are bringing cargo. So what we're seeing, kind of interestingly enough, is a buildup of cargo in some of the European ports as these ships are rerouting and redirecting and stuff. And of course, that has also added some delay time to the operation. Right. As I said, this is the largest ship, the MSC Irenia. She is the largest one in service, 1,300 feet long, 200 feet wide, 24,346 TEU. They will stack 25 high, which I find is fascinating from the bottom of the hold up to the dock. So that's pretty huge, right? When you get right down to it. It was been in service since March 21st. There are 5 of these ships coming out. They're fundamentally directed at the China North European Suez Pendulum Service, right? And here's an interesting factoid. If you took every one of these TEUs and put them end to end, they would stretch 92 miles. That kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective about just how big this ship is. In fact, I tell people that you could put the largest U.S. aircraft carrier on a flat deck of this ship. That's to show you kind of how big that is. It's a very, very big vessel. All right, now everybody's thinking to themselves, well, gee, when's it coming to the United States? Well, it's not. All right, and about the largest we're going to be able to handle in some of our bigger ports are the Amerimax ships, which are about 18,000 TEUs. These are also the largest ship that can go through the Panama Canal, right? And CMA CGM operates some of these, and there's several others. But one of the trends has been for the ocean carriers to build what they call handy-sized container ships, which are generally 16,000 TEUs and below, because they want to be able to hit more of the U.S. and obviously Canadian and Mexican ports. And we don't have the capacity to take these large ships, and in some cases, the depth. When I say the capacity, it's not just a matter of the depth of the water, or how the channels are laid out, but it's also terminal capacity, crane capacity, storage capacity, road and rail access. These are all limiting factors. So I think for overall, as the lines have planned these pendulum services and these transloads, into the smaller vessels, they're going to wind up calling on more U.S. ports, which is good, because they want to get the cargo as close as possible to the final destination and not relying as heavily on intermodal connectivity. So MSC is the interesting story here. Last year, they overtook Big Blue, Maersk, as the largest shipping company in the world. They have a diverse fleet, MSC does, as well as Maersk, right? But their fundamental focus has been on the container trade. They have about 850 vessels. This slide's a little bit old, but they have about 850 vessels. A lot of stuff that they've been buying up that are older vessels. And I think they're trying to just increase their capacity as quick as possible before they invest in new vessels. But also part of that is the result is that such lead time necessary to kind of get a new ship out. 18 to 24 months at least, after construction starts. They have a full capacity of about 6 million TEUs overall. They're hitting 1,900 port calls worldwide, right? And they have about 20% of the world's container trade right now, which I find is always very interesting that their focus has been, we want to be a predominant leader in this, right? So they're kind of neck and neck, obviously, with Maersk and also with COSCO and CMA CGM, who are also trying to increase their capacity as well. But MSC is the big player right now in the container trade, and that's continuing to expand as they're making more port calls to various locations. And they have a wide range of ships. They got very big ships. And of course, they have the handy-sized container ships, and they also have a large number of smaller vessels that are calling on the smaller ports. All right, a lot of people think that, places like just the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal are major choke points, and they are, right? But there's a lot of other places as well, that have created issues for us. The Malaccan Straits, for example, which have some limitations because of traffic. The English Channel, the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, with the number of ships going around the Cape of Good Hope, that's a choke point as well. Areas between Indonesia and Australia. Obviously, choke points have existed a long time. And whenever a portion of the world gets clogged up for whatever reason, right, the industry always has this tendency to shift. And that's why I think they're focused on increasing the number of vessels and the number of port calls, because they're not making money if they're not moving cargo. And the reality is all of this, if cargo gets jammed up here, they're going to shift that cargo to another location, right, and move that through. So that's what we have been seeing as a result of the Red Sea issues. Cargo have been moving down along the Cape of Good Hope, right? But some of that cargo has been moving trans-Pacific between Asia and the Western United States ports, which have increased, obviously, the amount of cargo going through the West Coast ports, right? And oddly enough, it's reduced the liability. The reliability of on schedule, got almost up to about 60% post-COVID, and now it's back in the low 50s. All right, which means that 50% of the time, or a little bit more or less, the ship is off schedule. So, the reality, I think, is that that's having an impact, obviously, on cargo deliveries overall. All right. So a lot of people looked at supply chains and said it was, the ports were an issue, and it wasn't. They created task force at the administration level. Canada, their government looked at their supply chains and their issues. We had high-end politicians like the Secretary of Transportation go visit the ports, and they set up this task force and everything. So the reality is, it was a whole pile of things, and it hasn't been solved. What has basically taken the pressure off the supply chains right now is the fact that volumes decreased considerably after COVID, right? Now, as the volumes are turning around and starting to come back again, we're running back into the same issues. All right. A lot of it is COVID demand. There were terminal hours issues with COVID. Of course, we had a lot of workers who were out. Space issues. They've been trying to get rid of the empties as quickly as possible, creating empty storage yards. We still have issues with truck drivers and chassis shortages, even though, a large number of our chassis are made in China, but we're building them now in the United States. The reliability, as I mentioned, is kicking off, has been problematic. You got gate and warehouse open periods, rail congestion issues, spine and well cars, are being remanufactured and trying to get those out as quick as possible. Warehousing space is easing, right? But it's filling right back up again. And there is some congestion. Worker shortages continues to be a big problem. Delivery driver shortages. If I'm a truck driver and I have an opportunity to work for Prime, or Amazon, and make more money and stay home every night, I'm doing that. We have vessel speeds being reduced because we're maintaining storage in transit, which means they're calling in some cases by appointment, on the ports and stuff like that. And of course, we see consumer demand changes are going up and down, though it has been strong. All right, it has been strong, and I can guarantee you that if the ILA goes on strike in the U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast ports, that will lead the evening news right after what's happening with Taylor Swift. and her boyfriend. So that's the reality in it. We don't get much attention unless there's a problem. And if they go on strike, we're going to have a little bit of an issue. All that being said, the industry is adapting. All right, cargo is starting to move through other ports, particularly in the West Coast ports. And as I mentioned, they're pushing a lot of cargo right through the U.S. East Coast ports before the strike should happen. All right, containers are exciting. I think this is also very interesting. This is the largest cruise ship in service right now, the Icon of the Seas, and there's several of this style being built. 7,600 passengers. So if I want to take a cruise, I can go with 7,600 of my closest friends with 2,300 crew. She's, just under 1,200 feet long, just under 160 foot wide, 20 decks. All right. Not a lot of ports can handle it right now, but obviously Miami and places like that do handle it. We can handle them up here in Portland, Maine. But the reality is that, a lot of times there's not the shoreside infrastructure to be able to handle that many people coming into port. So she's high end, right? But this is probably one of the most expensive cruises on the larger ships. All right, but it's not the most exclusive. All right, QE2, if you want to take a nice exclusive cruise with only about 2,100 passengers aboard, she's a very high-end ship in operation. But so is this. The pocket cruise ships are expensive. Now, COVID pushed about 12 companies out of business in North America and stuff. And then we saw a whole bunch of others in Europe and places like that also go out of business. But these are smaller vessels. They're small crops of people aboard. They're high end. They're high per diems, on the rates going aboard. But they give you a little bit of an experience. And of course, we're seeing the expansion on the Mississippi River. People find the Mississippi River intriguing, all right, but it's a river with a lot of rich history and everything. And but they've also been using some interesting marketing methodology. So, for example, the Bourbon Tour, with Viking cruises and stuff. So you get on a boat and you get poured off at the end of the cruise. So I think that's going to be interesting as well. So I think we'll see a resurgence of this, particularly because this is directed at the very high-end traveler, right? And older Americans like myself, as we affectionately referred to as blue hairs, we tend to like to be closer to home where you don't have to worry about money exchanges, passports, or medical and access. So all of those are key issues. So I think we're going to see this expand even more and more. All right. The companies are getting rid of a lot of the old ships, and it's fundamentally because they're old. They don't have the wow factor anymore. They don't have the glitz. It's funny. I look at some of these ships and I say to myself, I remember, back in the early 2000s when we were so excited to get some of these Carnival ships and these RCI ships into Portland, Maine. And now I shaved with one of them this morning. So I think the reality is they recognize this, and it's not just cruise ships. There's a lot of old ships that are going by the wayside, getting rid of them because they just can't keep up with modern propulsion standards, modern pollution standards, modern regulatory standards. So there's a lot of transitions, and that's part of the result of what's pushing up the number of ships that are out there. So despite the fact that they're scrapping a lot of them, they're replacing them. And as they're replacing those vessels, right, we're seeing the tonnages go up and the availability. All right, so what's going to happen in the next decade? And I like to tell people, my famous line is that if I could predict the future, I'd be a rich man sitting in the Bahamas right now with a pina colada in my hand. All right. Obviously, we're looking at what's happening with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and those impacts, which is kind of flip-flop where the whole focus has been. The world economy in some cases remains sluggish, but in many cases, like in Europe and stuff, they're chasing after us. We've had a good economy, despite when I hear people say, oh, we're headed for a recession, we're headed for this. You hear one economist that says we're going for a recession, another one we're going for a boom thing, and then the other one says, I don't know. And that's the one I listen to, the guy who says, I don't know, right? So the railroads continue to have gridlock, because they're still investing, and we see some occasional accidents. The railroad mergers that took place between Canadian Pacific and KCS, which gives them direct access by rail down into Mexico, right? Which it's truly become more of an intercontinental railroad than CN. And of course, CSX bought Guilford or Pan Am Railways up here in New England. So I'm going to be interested to see what happens with that. Because I've noticed that there's a lot of track reconstruction going on. There's new power up here, and that's been interesting as well. The spine cars, there was a big focus on the preventing any more explosions with tank cars, and there was a big focus on building those. And now they're going back to spine cars. Trucking rates are going to go up. 60% growth in trucks traffic is predicted over the next 30 years, but higher rates, driver shortages, new equipment being issued, and electronic logbooks, right, which have kept everybody basically honest. I'm going to see a continued fluctuation in container rates. The empty container redeployment, they're trying to push them back to Asia as fast as possible, reload them and get them back here. And they are taking agricultural cargo back, which is good as well. The regulatory issues coming out of the IMO, particularly European air standards, which are focused not just on sulfur, but on carbon dioxide. Technology changes. I was aboard a ship recently, and I went up in the bridge, and as most of you know, I wrote a book on radio navigation and marine communications, and with Captain Tom Bushy. And I look at the wheelhouses on these ships, and I go like, can't figure it out. Don't know what half of it is. It's all push button this and do that. And I'm an old dog. It's tough to find new tricks here. Offshore wind, which has been a big driving factor. Everybody wants to get interested in this. People see this as real availability because they can rebuild their terminals, with private sector money and stuff. The problem is the regulatory process has been so extensive that there have been some withdrawals, from investments. We're going to see Ocean Carrier Alliance and cargo pattern changes. MSC and the Maersk, the 2M, is going to dissolve in January, but they're already realigning. And I thought earlier on that we were going to see a lot of the alliances dissolve, and they're not. I think what's happening is they're just reorienting themselves, and that's interesting. They're still talking about, some of the congressmen are talking about removing antitrust immunity from the ocean carriers, but that's kind of on by the wayside while everybody's trying to get reelected. All right, the ship operating costs obviously are up. We got new fuels, you got emission reductions, new engineering and propulsion units being put in. Vessel fueling, we're looking at the aspect of redeploying ultra low sulfur diesel, but a lot of ships are already out there, so they're trying to put scrubbers in. And the issue is that there's such a long lag time in getting scrubbers installed that they're not keeping up with that either, right? The charter rates, we're seeing fluctuation with crude oil depending on international demand. I think the price of crude right now is under $70, right? And that has an impact on what the tanker rate fluctuations look like as well. New environmental regulations, particularly as I mentioned with emissions, cybersecurity, and cyber attacks, which are a way of life nowadays. The expansion of autonomous vessels beyond just the test stage. Port facility expansion, a lot of that going on. There was a lot of it, money came out of the federal government, Build Back America, obviously PDIP. And so as a result of that, everybody took kind of a breath and have been investing in their ports, right? And not a new issue, but an issue that's caught my attention, and that's World Port Controlling Interest, which we'll talk about as well. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act was driven as a result of all of delays and all the demurrage fees that shippers were facing. And basically, the shippers were complaining and saying they were being treated unfair in all of this. And so the Federal Maritime Commission had first established guidelines and then began to put administrative laws in place. Well, subsequent to that, and in parallel almost, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 got passed, most of which has been implemented now, right? And what it basically deals with is, fairness to shippers. And in the old days, which were not that long ago, if you had a complaint against a shipper, you'd have to file it with the FMC in person, have an attorney walk in with all the paperwork, and now you can do it online. So it's made life a lot simpler. So there's been a lot of these, and they have been imposing fines. The Federal Maritime Commission has been imposing fines on the ocean carriers, for violation of the Shipping Act, right? And the interesting thing with all of this is that with all of these cases moving forward and shippers, getting some more protection, right? that at the end of the day, it really doesn't address the supply chain issues. It just addresses the delays that are being caused both in ports and being caused by ocean carriers. All right. Another big issue right now is which fuel should we provide for ports? And there's been a lot of discussion about different types of fuels. Obviously, everybody wants to reduce their emissions. We had a lot of people go to electric equipment, particularly up here in the north, and they discovered that electric equipment is not that effective because, particularly with batteries, you got to recharge them more frequently. They don't hold the charge as long, and it takes longer to charge them up. And you don't get it to full capacity. So, they're looking at alternatives. They're looking at hydrogen-based equipment and stuff like that. But it also affects, what's happening with fuel. And they've been testing different systems. They have all electric vessels, but they're running short operations. LNG is proven to be very effective, though it doesn't curtail a lot of the CO2 going out, which is catching people's attention. They're talking about ammonia fueling. And ammonia is a very good fuel. However, it's also very dangerous. All right. And I'm not sure that ammonia is going to actually be a solution to all of this. I think in the long run, petroleum will remain, a fairly strong fuel availability, will continue. And that many of the ships will be dual fuel. And if you are developing a ship that's all LNG operated or something along those lines, it's probably a ship that goes back and forth to the same port, like a passenger ship or so. So there's been a big question about which fuels should be made available in ports. And this has still got to shake out. The major focus is how do we reduce emissions, but what's the right fuel to have available for our vessels? All right. I do see that even though we talked about it back in 1976 when I got out of Maine Maritime Academy, the hub and spoke system, and everybody was talking about, oh yeah, there's only going to be a few hub ports and everything's going to work that way. That never evolved, obviously, but it is evolving now, and it's fundamentally because of the pendulum service and these ultra large container ships, which will go back and forth between Asia and Europe, as I mentioned, transload into the handy size vessels, which will come to North America, right? And in turn, we are seeing a lot of success with the smaller carriers, like companies like Aimskip, for example, which is an Icelandic-based company, which are tied in with CMA CGM. And I also think that we'll eventually see container on barge evolve much more effectively once the carriers begin to recognize it makes sense. All right, as the operation between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, right, moving containers by barge, pulling their empties out of St. Louis, moving them downriver, and then putting them on barges and then transloading them down to New Orleans. Right, the America's Marine Highway has expanded some, and that's great. I think the biggest change, in addition to these new routes that have been put in play, is obviously the fact that it now includes bulk cargoes as well as just containers, right? And Canada and Mexico are included as part of Marine Highway project. So if you have a connection with a Canadian port, you can develop that. Now, we're not going to give money to the Canadians, but we are using this money. Once you're designated as a Marine Highway project, then there's funding available for the purchase of equipment, that can be done. And this has worked effectively. So I think this was a big step on the part of the DOT to have these designated, and there are more designations out there in the offering and stuff like that. And we'll see more of this come to fruition, which I think is a good thing because it really helps developing the partnerships between ports. Petroleum shipments, we fought over the pipelines. We fought over one pipeline, with 30,000 miles of pipeline buried under the Dakotas already. But I happened to pass today on the way back from town, a group of people standing in a corner saying, eliminate fossil fuels. All right. And these are the same people up here in Maine who really didn't want to see Alberta sand oil being exported, right? Not recognizing that most of the fuel and home heating oil here, particularly in Maine, right, is coming from Canada. It's coming through Irving. And a lot of that is, Alberta tar sands oil. So I always want to get a sticker that says, this car runs on Alberta tar sands oil. But, a lot of people don't recognize the understanding of the logistics. So what's happened is, as a result of deferring the building of pipelines, we're moving it by rail. And quite frankly, pipelines are much more effective and safer than moving things by rail. even with our rail systems improving and new tank cars being deployed. All right. One of the things that happened after, obviously, the bridge in Baltimore went down and the tragic loss of the 6 workers on the bridge, and boy, it could have been worse, was the fact that we as port directors and port professionals really need to focus on our own internal infrastructure. There were no protections on this bridge. They're looking at replacing it, obviously, with a higher bridge and with new protections in regard to fendering and stuff. And what we have to recognize here is that after the bridge went down in Tampa, Florida, the Sunshine Skyway, the AASHTO, which is the Association of State Transportation Officials, right, came out with regulations or rules basically for new bridge build and recommendations for retrofitting. And a lot of the bridges have not been retrofitted. And it's basically a matter of funding. So I have noticed recently that I've been working on several projects looking at fendering systems on various ports and everything. And I think it's incumbent upon port directors to get together with their DOTs, get together with the feds, get together with the Army Corps, and have the conversation. Is our infrastructure well protected? Because anybody thinks that ships operate without casualties, they're fooling themselves. All right, ships have casualties. Sometimes they're just minor little things. Sometimes they're very significant. Like recently, they had a propulsion loss on a ship going into Tampa. So the reality is that this is incumbent upon port directors and officials to really look at their infrastructure and say, what would happen? What would happen if one of our bridges got hit? All right, what impact would it have on the port overall? All right, is the union going to strike? Well, we'll know on the 30th of September. There's certainly been a lot of rhetoric going back and forth, and we recognize that, that's normally what happens, when you have an impending labor action. And a lot of people recognize that we haven't had labor action on the U.S. East Coast or Gulf Coast in a long time, right? But there's new union membership. There's, obviously about 85,000 longshore workers. And we've seen everybody else, take job actions and in essence get raises in pay, and that's the same thing that's happening here. They're looking, the ILA is looking at a 77% increase in wages over 6 years. They want to eliminate any automation or semi-automation from the ports, increase the benefit plans and everything like that. So, there's a reasonableness to this. I've never had a concern about ILA workers. Both ports that I managed had ILA personnel, got along with them just fine and stuff like that. But certainly recognize that, there's a certain need here. And we're an industry that everybody's making good money with. And the fact of the matter is that our ports should be doing the same thing. For many years, we were in the social welfare business. And, there was no deal so bad we couldn't do it. Right. So not so much anymore. Whenever I do work with marine terminals and stuff, I always say, you guys need to have your piece of the pie, because the reality in all of this is that in the long run, it represents kind of pennies on the dollar by the time it gets to the retail shelf. So we're all holding our breath. We hope it's resolved. We certainly hope it's resolved. Hopefully they'll find a middle ground. So I'm thinking to myself that, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It's like asking me who's going to win the election. All right, top world ports. These are the top 20, as you can see. A lot of them, the vast majority of them in Asia, obviously, except for Rotterdam and Port Hedland, which is a big bulk port in the Netherlands. And these are 2023 numbers, so we'll see what 2024 looks like when I do this again in the spring, right? Our Canadian and U.S. port rankings. Houston is still the largest port, though South Louisiana is catching up. They used to be the largest tonnage port in the Western Hemisphere, Port of South Louisiana. So I think they'll get back there eventually. But Houston is running also very strong as well. And of course, you can see our Canadian brethren. Vancouver still remains the biggest one, followed by St. John, and all the rest, including Prince Rupert. Where we're seeing more cargo coming through Prince Rupert. So I think that's going to change the scales a little bit, right? Not to focus on just that, but the cruise market is picking up. and a lot of new builds, a lot of repeat cruisers, people wanting to see the latest ships, which is great, and go on those cruises. And they're making it very comfortable. Got a lot of great shore excursions, and the ports are competing, to have the cruise ships in there if they have the facilities and capabilities. Though, if you're the icon of the seas, you're not going to be calling a New Bedford. All right. One of the things that I found has been very fascinating is looking at how the deployment of port management is occurring around the world. As we know that, China has got a lot of the cargo moves. They're number four, as far as Costco, which is a combined element of all three of their carriers, right? But they now Chinese interests control 100 terminals in over 50 nations, right? They're building a new facility down in Peru, right? They have these key port locations, right? They have interest in other ports as well, all right? And they have 8 of the 10 largest ports worldwide, that they have interest in or are controlling in Asia. All right. The interesting thing is that they literally will walk into a port that's been managed locally and say, we'll buy the port. And that happened in Paris. And fortunately, the Greeks wound up, they gave a lot of control to the Chinese, right? But they want to take advantage of the revenue that's generated. So now I talked to a good friend of mine who's one of our faculty members who's in Army logistics, and he says they're aware of it. There are enough smaller ports that they can still deploy materials and goods in case of any issues or any war areas or areas of hate and discontent that pop up. They can still get military cargo there. But I just find it fascinating that as I look at this more and more, right, that we see more and more of these hubs, right, that are now being controlled by Chinese interests, right? And I think in the overall, I don't know if the federal government is really paying attention to this overall. I hear all sorts of stuff about China, right? But I never hear anything really about this. I recognize it's a worldwide issue, right? But we need to be cognizant of the fact that, they're taking on more and more and more. And they have approached various ports in the United States about rebuilding those ports. And to date, we haven't seen too much of that happen, right? Panama Canal, right? Well, they're kind of getting back to normal, right? They were handling, 36, 37, 38 a day. We had the low water issues there. There's about a day delay where there were 2 or 3 delays of ship going through. They had appointments and stuff. Most of the ships, again, this are under, 16,000 TEUs. The tolls are fairly high. But in the long run, we're seeing that overall, most of the cargo going through the canal is headed either into the United States or out of the United States into the Pacific, or from the Pacific. So this has been a bit of a heartache, but now they're starting to learn how to expand their holding capacity of fresh water, particularly in the old lock system, which depends entirely upon Gatun Lake. Right, and of course they recycle the water on the new locks, but it's also was low water in Gatun Lake, which was the connecting between the Pacific and the Atlantic side. Right. Oh, sorry. The Suez Canal, of course, their issue is they're fairly unlimited in what they can do. They double laned it in portions of it, and they're doing further construction. 12% of the world trade, 30% of the container trade. They're averaging 60 ships per day. And when the canal was having issues, a lot of that cargo was moving, west through the Suez Canal, right? And then comes, the Houthis, right? And the whole issue with that is that they're diverting around. So this has dropped off a considerable amount of traffic in the Suez Canal. So if they get that under control finally, I think in the long run, we'll see cargo return. This is part of the planning for the pendulum services, and they want those big ships to go through the Suez Canal. And in fact, Saudi Arabia is building a huge port right on the Red Sea just to be able to capture some of that cargo moving back and forth. So the big impacts, of course, low water levels in the transits, which are almost back to normal. And of course, what's happening with the Suez Canal, though it's not for lack of trying. The amount of military vessels and everything over in that area have increased dramatically, and it's multinational. And the thing is that while we haven't seen as many attacks, all it takes is one attack. And, merchant seamen, their lives are in danger. The cargoes and the ships are in danger. Like they had with this tanker that they intentionally tried to blow up and set on fire and stuff. So, as long as that continues, people are going to be safe because they don't want their insurance rates to go so high on these ship operations. So hopefully that will be resolved fairly quickly. And quite frankly, in my personal opinion, there's only one way to resolve it, and that's with force. All right. Of course, we're all facing blockchain technology. This has been around for a while in the financial world, and I don't see this as big an issue, except we need to adapt to it. A lot of the lines have been doing this anyway, but now it's become more harmonized and stuff. And it really makes the transaction simpler because you can go from one place to the next place, and a linear series of steps in booking your cargo and also getting paid for the handling of the cargo. Right? Coastal wind farms, well, there's a bunch of issues with this. Jones Act vessels to install them. The latest turbines are 18 megawatts, and there's a lack of these turbines available. The financing costs went up because of the interest rate changes. They're looking at floating units up here in Maine, in particular, to develop some technology for that. BOEM is the big issue, the Bureau of Energy Management, which has had a very long delay process with the Coast Guard because there's so many intricate issues tied into it. But we do know that Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, and Carolinas, Gulf of Mexico, those leases are out. They're looking at leases on the West Coast, and they're looking now at leases on the territories. The long delays in sort of the regulatory framework have caused some of the companies to withdraw from this and or renegotiate with the states. So, the goal is still to try to provide wind energy, which obviously is a lot cleaner. The thing is, can we develop the issue? And then if we develop a wind farm, are we able to plug it into the existing network, right? And that's another big issue too, because not all the networks, and the grids have the capacity to take a high amount of voltage coming back in and amperage coming back into the land site. So they may have to loop these together all one of these days. People are probably aware of the PDIP program. There are lots of federal grants came out, and that's continuing. At least it will through November. All right, and obviously some of it has been committed into next year and stuff like that. But we'll see what happens. I think that's going to be a big change. Maybe we probably won't have that same amount of money available as we have. This is another big issue that came up, and this was a 25% tariff on Chinese products and goods and stuff like that. And of course, one of the things that hit was the ship-to-shore cranes, right? There are at least 7 ports that had about 35 cranes on order, which means it would have added 25% to this, right? And quite a substantial amount of money. It was supposed to be imposed on August 1st, right? It has been delayed, all right? So I'm hearing it's been delayed for several months. Somebody else told me it's been delayed for a year. I think, quite frankly, nobody's sure at this point. Everybody's taking a deep breath, wait for the election, right? But, the big company, about 80% of the worldwide market for large container cranes are controlled by the Chinese. So if they do put the tariffs on, that's going to make buying this equipment much more substantial since, they produce the largest amount of these STS cranes. Right. There's another big issue with export cars, and not all the cars going out are being manufactured. Some of them are just disappearing off our streets. And Customs and Border Protection, with their limited resources, trying to make an effort to try to figure out what cars are most likely to be exported. They go to Africa, they go to the Middle East and stuff like that, and quite a bit. And they focused on Norfolk, Newport News, Baltimore, and Philly. Right, 73% of the cars were SUVs, which is the vast majority of cars we got. BMW, Toyota, Infiniti, Mercedes, Aston Martins. Right, motorcycles. Right, somebody swiped the John Deere combine, so I thought was interesting. But they don't want electric vehicles. They've only found one electric vehicle and stuff like that. I found was fascinating is I just bought a Hyundai only to find out later on that Hyundais are one of the prime targets for stolen vehicles being shipped overseas. We do have a couple of autonomous container vessels out there, the Yara Berkman, which came out, and then the Zhang Fui. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Yara Birkeland would carry a whopping 120 TEUs, right? 300 TEUs on the Zifui. I hopefully I pronounced that correctly. But they were both successful tests. But talking to the carriers, particularly the major companies, they say, we're not going to have autonomous giant ships going across the ocean because just the insurance cost alone would be exhaustive. All right. The SS United States, for me, it's always a ship that I always liked. I knew the last captain of the United States very well, and she's been sitting over in Philadelphia for a number of years, um, stripped out. There's not much left to her, except the hull is sound and everything. They've been trying to make her into some sort of hotel complex or event venue and stuff like that, and they've been ordered to be out of there by the 12th of September. The only proposal that's kicking out right now is to take her off of Florida and sink her as a reef. Um, I think that would be a sad situation, particularly, it's a complicated thing to run a ship like this, to find a place for it, to make it attractive. Look at the issues the Queen Mary had for many years, right? But I remember speaking with Commodore Alexanderson, and he said, I would hate to see her scrapped. Maybe taking her out and committing her to the deep would be the better way to do it. So this is yet to unfold, and we'll see what happens. She was a great technological advance for the United States. It was wonderful to see that. And I think in the long run, I remember seeing her in 1974. I was aboard her, and she was just out of service only a few years. Everything was still aboard, including the newspapers of the day. Everybody walked off the ship. So now, of course, she's all stripped out. So we'll see. But we're keeping our fingers crossed, and we wish Susan Gibbs and everybody a great deal of good luck with this. All right. Good news. Titanic 2 is back on track. Yes, they're rebuilding the Titanic as a theme park in China, which would be kind of fascinating. And it's been on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again. She's going to go to Dubai, and then from Dubai she'll go Southampton to New York. I wouldn't mind being aboard. I thought that'd be kind of cool. Maybe I'll throw on my hat and see if I get a job aboard. I'll bring my own Gumby suit. And the people up in Newfoundland are very excited about this because they get to build that new iceberg that they've been hoping to build. So we'll see what happens in all of this. All right. So for those of you unfamiliar with the IAMPE, all right, only industry group worldwide providing professional port management certification, 6 academic partners, 10 industry association partners, 24 port and agency partners. We have over 3,000 alumni, including 130 U.S. Coast Guard personnel that have taken our courses. We offer programs in marine terminal operations, port management, executive management. Of course, we do commissioner seminars as well. That's been a very exciting chase for all of us. Fall courses, we have one in Ponce coming up, in New Jersey in October, Jeffersonville in November, and LA Long Beach in December. Go onto our website, www.iamp.e.org. And if you're a member of any of the industry association partners, there's a discount on taking the course. So we work very hard to keep the cost down, right? And if you have a question about anything we've covered or would like a copy of the presentation, just send me an email at jeffrey.monroe@iampe.org. It's been a pleasure to take some time to talk to you. Sorry about phones ringing and things like that, nature of the beast, right? But hope you all have a very wonderful fall and a very safe winter. And we'll probably talk to you again sometime in the early spring. So take care, everybody, and our best wishes from all of the staff here at the International Association of Maritime Port Executives.